Hi, I'm John, and I'm an atheist. 1% of the American populace self-identifies as atheists. 5% officially fit the definition, according to a Pew Research poll that came out in 2007. Only 41% of people in the United States think that atheists have a chance of going to heaven. Atheists are also the most distrusted minority by a large margin. 47% of Americans would disapprove of a child marrying an atheist. 57% of Americans believe that you have to believe in a God to be moral. Now, all these things are interesting stats, and I'm a keen observer of culture, religious culture in America, and it doesn't take much noticing to see that non-believers are usually portrayed in a way that is unflattering, flawed, self-interested, uncaring, sometimes immoral. Not always. Two examples that I've seen recently in the last couple of years was a TV show on HBO called Lucky Louie, where the main family in one episode did say that they were non-believers, and it wasn't some moral play. They just didn't believe it, and they weren't ostracized or made fun of or caricatures of some other things. And also on the Family Guy, interestingly enough, just a few weeks ago, Brian came out as an atheist and was ostracized by the community severely, and ultimately gave a little speech at the end of the episode, which was surprisingly very unwishy-washy in its conviction and his conviction, and unapologetic about it. And I was really surprised. And then very recently after that, I listened to an interview with Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy, and of course he is a non-believer, self-described atheist himself. So there you go. But generally speaking, when you're watching stuff on TV, religious people tend to be very down on that. I was watching the CNN a couple years ago, and they talked about a family being literally ostracized from the community, losing their apartment once they found out, the small community, I think in Nebraska or somewhere, they found out because their daughter, who played on the varsity basketball team at the start of the season, would refuse to start the game with a prayer with everyone else at the team in half court, and she stood off by herself, and that led to questions and them being ostracized. And CNN covered this kind of in a neutral way, obviously sympathetic to this family because of, strictly because of their religious beliefs and not really anything else that they had done. They had received kind of the wrath of this small community, and they were ultimately, I think, had to move. And they threw it over to the panel, and this wasn't Crossfire or something like that. It was just a group of religious panelists, and they basically 2 out of the 3 came to the conclusion that they should just literally, quote unquote, shut up. And I mean that's CNN. That's not Fox. And found that very interesting as well. And even on a TV show like House, where House is a tremendously good doctor, but an emotional cripple and a severely flawed character to the point of almost having no emotions at all. And he's renowned for that, and kind of, again, another stereotypical way that since atheists believe in science or a purposelessness to life, that there is no emotional attachment to the world or to people. And I find that, while House is a very interesting character, I found that deeply offensive and ultimately damaging as a stereotype, I think, because that show is probably the most popular show in the history of television featuring someone who doesn't believe in God. So I'm not really doing this video justice, but I wanted to talk about this, and I think that the main problem is that 57% that does not believe that it's possible to be moral without God. And I think that is on the non-believer community. And I've said this in a video a couple weeks ago, but we do an incredibly poor job of justifying secular morals or secular ethics. And I try to communicate that to people. I usually don't get in those type of arguments. Usually the arguments are always about why, about the details of a person's religion and not necessarily defending my own secular ethics. But you do hear the constant refrain of, without a Bible or God telling you that it's bad, how do you know that it's bad? And obvious, there's various arguments on this. Surprisingly, I've seen, obviously, there's a evolutionary psychology and biology of social creatures, and that cooperating creatures are going to have a better survival rate in certain groups than against trying to strike out as an individual. And you see this in nature, of course, where groups survive together, and if they cannot survive as individuals. But then also, I've heard philosophers argue that our moral systems are almost primarily and predominantly learned. That we don't have a very strong intuitive sense of morality, and I find that also interesting, and that actually that argument fairly compelling in some ways as well. I think that you see on YouTube, the primarily is evolutionary psychology, which is a fledgling science at best. I think is also what makes it a little bit. It's trotted out, and I don't think there's a lot of real hard justification for that in terms of empirical evidence. Maybe people can supply more harder cases than I know of, but as far as I know, it's almost a philosophical argument in its core. But anyway, that's today's idea, and I will hopefully talk more about this. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye.